The first time I realized my family had already decided my future without telling me was over a chair. Not a contract, not a will, just a chair. It was Thanksgiving morning, and I was 31 years old, standing in my parents' dining room, holding a stack of folded napkins, while my mother rearranged the seating chart for the third time. She moved names around with a pen like she was solving a puzzle that didn't include me. "Sit anywhere," she said, without looking up. That was new. Thanksgiving had always been rigid in our house. Assigned seats, traditions my mother guarded like law. My father at the head, my older sister Rachel to his right, my younger brother Ethan to his left. Spouses next, grandchildren. Everyone else filled the gaps. I waited, napkin still in my hands, watching her write and cross out names. "Mom," I said, calm, "where do you want me?" She paused. Just a second too long. "Oh," she said lightly, "you can grab a chair later. We might need space." Space. I nodded and carried the napkins to the kitchen. No argument, no questions. I'd learned a long time ago that confusion made people uncomfortable, and discomfort always found a way to land on me. My name is Claire Whitman. I live in Ohio. I work as a project coordinator for a medical equipment supplier. I pay my own rent. I've never asked my parents for money, and until that morning, I believed that meant I was independent, not expendable. Rachel arrived next, sweeping in with her husband and 2 kids, loud and certain, already talking about the promotion she just landed at my father's company. Whitman Industrial Supply, family business, 3 generations. Ethan followed, empty-handed as usual, joking about traffic. My father clapped him on the back and handed him a beer. No one asked me how work was going. No one noticed I'd lost weight. When dinner was ready, chairs scraped across the floor. Everyone took their places easily, instinctively. There were 8 chairs at the table, 9 people in the room. I stood there, napkin still folded in my hand, waiting for someone to notice. Rachel glanced up first. "Oh," she said, "did we forget one?" My mother smiled, tight. "It's fine. Claire can eat in the kitchen. It's quieter in there anyway." It wasn't said cruelly. That was the part that made it worse. It was said like a solution. I looked at my father. He didn't look back. "Sure," I said. "No problem." I took my plate into the kitchen and sat alone at the small breakfast table where I'd done homework as a kid. Through the doorway, I could hear laughter, glasses clinking. My father talking about legacy and growth. That word again. Legacy. Halfway through the meal, my phone buzzed. A text from Rachel. "Don't take it personally. You know how Mom is." I stared at the screen, then put the phone face down. That night, as I washed dishes, my father came into the kitchen. "Everything okay?" he asked, like he was checking the weather. "Yes," I said. He nodded. "Good. Big week coming up. I'll need you free on Friday." "For what?" I asked. He hesitated. "Meeting with the lawyers. Just paperwork. Your signature." I dried my hands slowly. "What kind of paperwork?" "Estate stuff," he said. "Routine." I waited. He didn't elaborate. "I work that day," I said. He waved it off. "You can take a half day." I looked at him then. Really looked. The man who taught me how to ride a bike, who told me I was smart, dependable, easy. "Okay," I said. The paperwork arrived 2 days later by email. Not one document, several. Dense, formal. My name appearing in places that made my stomach tighten. Consent, waiver, acknowledgement. I read every page that night, sitting on my couch while the city outside my window went dark. By signing, I would formally acknowledge that I had no claim to Whitman Industrial Supply, no voting interest, no right to contest future decisions regarding ownership or succession. In plain English, I was agreeing that the business would pass to Rachel and Ethan alone. No mention of me, no explanation. Just absence made official. I closed the laptop and stared at the wall. It wasn't about money. It was about erasure. The next morning, I called my grandmother, my father's mother, Eleanor Whitman, 92, sharp as glass. "Did you know about this?" I asked her. There was a pause, then a sigh. "They finally decided to stop pretending," she said. My chest tightened. "Pretending what?" "That you ever meant to inherit anything," she replied. "Claire, sweetheart, you were always the one they leaned on, not the one they planned for." I swallowed. Why didn't you tell me? Because you were surviving, she said. And I didn't want to be the reason you stopped. I hung up with my hands shaking. Friday came. I didn't go to the meeting. Instead, I sat in my car outside a small law office downtown, staring at the name on the door. Margaret Sloan, attorney at law. I didn't know yet what I was going to do. I only knew one thing. The chair at that table hadn't been forgotten. It had been removed. And whatever came next would not be decided without me. Margaret Sloan's office smelled like old books and coffee that had been reheated too many times. It wasn't impressive. That made me trust. She didn't rush me. She didn't interrupt. She let me talk until the story ran out of air, until even I could hear the pattern underneath my words. When I finished, she leaned back in her chair and said, "They're not asking for your consent. They're asking for your surrender." I nodded. That's how it felt. She tapped the documents I'd brought. This isn't unusual in family businesses. One child is the face, one is the heir, and one is the stabilizer. The stabilizer, I repeated. The one who doesn't rock the boat, she said. The one they rely on emotionally, but exclude structurally. That landed hard, because it was true. Margaret slid one page toward me. If you sign this, you waive any present or future claim, not just to the company, to related assets, trusts, even derivative interests you might not know exist yet. So they're cleaning up, I said. Yes, she replied. And they're doing it before something changes. What kind of something? She held my gaze. Health, sale, death. Take your pick. I left her office with more questions than answers, which somehow felt better than blind certainty. That evening, my mother called. "Your father said you didn't show up," she said. "I had other plans," I replied. She sighed. "Claire, this doesn't have to be dramatic." "I'm not being dramatic," I said. "I'm being careful." "With what?" she asked. "With myself." There was a pause. Then her voice softened. "You know your love." I closed my eyes. Love isn't the same as inclusion. She didn't answer that. 2 days later, Rachel showed up at my apartment unannounced. She looked irritated, not worried. "You're making things awkward," she said, standing just inside the door, like she didn't intend to stay. "I didn't know I needed permission to ask questions," I replied. She crossed her arms. "Dad's under a lot of stress." "So am I," I said. She laughed once, sharp. "You're not part of the business, Claire. You never wanted to be." "That's not true," I said. "I just wasn't invited." Rachel shook her head. "You wouldn't survive there. It's brutal." I looked at her carefully. "Then why are you so afraid of me reading the paperwork?" Her mouth opened, then closed. "You're overthinking this," she said. "Just sign. Take whatever Mom gives you later and move on." That was the moment I understood. They already had plans for me. Not a future, a containment strategy. After she left, I sat on the floor of my apartment for a long time, staring at nothing. Memories surfaced uninvited. Every time I'd been the one asked to help, to smooth things over, to be flexible. I wasn't invisible because I was weak. I was invisible because I was useful that way. The next morning, Margaret called. "I did some digging," she said. "Your grandmother set up a trust." My heart skipped. "What kind of trust?" "A discretionary family trust," she replied. "Old, quiet, assets tied to the company's property holdings. And I'm in it?" I asked. "Yes," she said. "As a secondary beneficiary." Secondary. Again. "But here's the part your parents don't want you to notice," she continued. "If the company restructures or transfers ownership, the trust provisions can change." "In whose favor?" "Yours," she said simply. The silence on my end stretched. "That's why they're rushing," she added. "They want your signature before the trigger." I thought about the Thanksgiving table, the missing chair, the casual way my mother had redirected me to the kitchen. It hadn't been about space. It had been about position. That night, I sent one email to my father, my mother, Rachel, Ethan. "I am not signing anything until I receive full disclosure of all estate planning documents that mention my name. No accusations, no emotion, just a line in the sand." The response came fast. My father called. I didn't answer. My mother texted. "Please don't do this," Rachel wrote. "You're being selfish." Ethan sent nothing. That hurt more than the rest. 2 days later, Margaret forwarded me a message from my father's attorney requesting a meeting. "They're escalating," she said. "That means you matter." I laughed softly. That's a strange comfort. It's real, she replied. The meeting was scheduled for the following week. I didn't feel brave. I felt awake. For the first time in my life, I wasn't reacting to disappointment. I was responding to information, and that changed everything. The meeting was scheduled for Monday at 10 in the morning. At a law firm I'd passed 100 times without noticing. Glass walls, neutral art, everything designed to feel calm and reasonable. Margaret arrived 5 minutes early. She nodded once when she saw me, like we were stepping into something together. My parents were already there. My father sat at the head of the table out of habit, even though this wasn't his office. My mother sat beside him, hands folded, posture perfect. Rachel leaned back in her chair, scrolling on her phone. Ethan wasn't there. That was the first thing I noticed. The second was the empty chair across from me. I sat anyway. The attorney introduced himself. His voice was smooth, practiced. He spoke about efficiency, clarity, and avoiding misunderstandings. Words that sounded kind, but meant control. Then he slid a revised document across the table. This version, he said, addresses your concerns. I didn't touch it. Before we discuss revisions, I said, I want to understand why my name was excluded in the first place. No one answered immediately. My father cleared his throat. Claire, this isn't about exclusion. It is, I replied calmly. It's about removal. Rachel scoffed. You're making this bigger than it is. I looked at her. Then explain it. She didn't. My mother leaned forward. We didn't want to burden you. That word again. Burden, I said. With what? With responsibility, she replied. With conflict. I nodded slowly. You mean risk. She looked away. Margaret spoke then. My client is named in a discretionary trust established by Eleanor Whitman. Any restructuring of the company could trigger a redistribution. The attorney's smile tightened. That trust is separate, he said. Connected, Margaret corrected. And undisclosed. My father's jaw clenched. This was never meant to involve Claire. I met his eyes. That's the problem, the attorney interjected. We're prepared to offer a settlement. Rachel straightened. See, this is what we were trying to avoid. A settlement implies a dispute, I said. I didn't create one. You did. He slid the document closer. A guaranteed distribution. No future claims. I glanced at the number. It was enough to quiet most people. It wasn't enough to buy my consent. I won't sign away rights I was never told I had, I said. My father's voice dropped. You're being unreasonable. No, I said. I'm being precise. The room went still. This process depends on trust, he said. I almost smiled. Then you should have started with honesty. Rachel stood abruptly. This is ridiculous. You're not even involved. I turned to her. Then why are you afraid of me being informed? Her mouth opened, closed. Ethan still hadn't arrived. The attorney cleared his throat. We'll need time to respond. Margaret nodded. We'll proceed with a formal request for disclosure. My mother's hand tightened on her purse. Claire, please. I looked at her. You taught me to read the fine print. We stood to leave. As I walked past my father, he said quietly, You're going to regret this. I didn't stop. I already regret trusting you. Outside, the air felt colder, cleaner. Margaret exhaled. They didn't expect you to hold the line. I didn't either, I said. That night, my phone buzzed. A message from Ethan. Can we talk? We met the next evening at a coffee shop near my apartment. He looked tired. Guilty. I didn't know, he said immediately. About what? I asked. About the trust. About the paperwork. I stirred my coffee. But you were willing to benefit from it. He winced. I didn't think it mattered. That's the privilege, I said quietly, not having to think about. He rubbed his hands together. Dad's scared. I nodded. I know. He says if the trust gets audited. He should have thought of that before using it, I said. Ethan looked at me. What do you want? The question followed me everywhere. I want to stop being managed, I said. That's it. He was silent for a long time. I don't think they know how, he said finally. That's not my problem, I replied. 2 weeks passed. No calls, no messages. Then Margaret forwarded me a thick file. Trust accounting. Dates, transfers, notes, patterns. They've been moving assets, she said over the phone. Quietly. Through holding companies. And my signature would have made it untouchable, I said. Yes. I sat back. heart steady. This wasn't emotional anymore. It was structural. The next morning, I authorized Margaret to file a formal request with the court. Not an accusation. A request. Transparency. By noon, my mother called. Her voice was shaking. "This is getting serious." "It always was," I replied. "You're tearing the family apart," she said. I closed my eyes. "No, I'm stepping out of the place you trapped me in." That night, I dreamed of the dining room table. This time, there were only 8 chairs, and none of them were empty. The shift was subtle at first. No more casual calls. No more gentle reminders. The warmth drained out of every interaction, like someone had turned a valve. Margaret warned me. When silence stops working, people switch strategies. She was right. The first letter arrived 3 days after the court filing. Not from my parents, from their attorney. Formal language, polite threats disguised as concern. It suggested that my actions could damage family relationships and expose me to unnecessary legal costs. I read it once, then set it aside. The second letter came a week later, sharper. It questioned my standing, implied bad faith. Still, nothing from my parents directly. That hurt more than the letters. I kept going to work. I answered emails. I cooked dinner. I slept. From the outside, my life looked unchanged. Inside, something fundamental had shifted. I was no longer trying to be understood. I was documenting. Margaret and I met again to review the trust accounting in detail. She laid the pages out across her desk, tapping certain entries with a pen. "Here," she said. "And here. See the pattern?" I did. Funds moved out just before quarterly reviews, then moved back. Paper losses softened, real risk hidden. "And this holding company," she continued, "your father controls it. But the trust owns part of the underlying asset, so he was borrowing against my future," I said. "Yes," she replied, without disclosure. I felt something settle in my chest. Not anger. Clarity. "This isn't about inheritance," I said. "It's about control." "Always is," she replied. That evening, Rachel called. Not angry, not defensive. Friendly. "Can we talk?" she asked. "Just us?" Against my better judgment, I agreed. We met at a wine bar halfway between our apartments. She hugged me like nothing had changed. "You look tired," she said. "So do you," I replied. She ordered for both of us. Another old habit. "Dad's having a hard time," she said softly. "This is affecting his health." "I didn't create that," I replied. She nodded. "I know. But you're making it worse." "There it is," I said quietly. She frowned. "What?" "The part where I'm responsible for how everyone feels." She leaned forward. "Claire, this doesn't end the way you think it does." "I'm not trying to end anything," I said. "I'm trying to understand it." She sighed. "If you keep pushing, the trust could freeze. No one gets anything." I looked at her carefully. "You'd rather no one get anything than risk me having a say." Her silence answered me. I paid my share and stood. I'm done negotiating my existence. She watched me leave without following. 2 days later, my grandmother called. "I heard things are unpleasant," she said. "That's one word for it," I replied. She chuckled softly. "Your father always believed order mattered more than fairness." "And you?" I asked. "I believed fairness had a way of resurfacing," she said. "Usually through the quiet ones." Her support steadied me more than she knew. The court acknowledged our filing the following week. Nothing dramatic. Just a notice, a date. But it changed everything. My father finally called that night. "Why are you doing this?" he asked, his voice stripped of authority. "I'm not doing anything," I replied. "I'm responding." "To what?" he snapped. "To being removed without consent," I said. "To being used without acknowledgement." "You were never meant to be involved," he said. "That's not the same as never being affected," I replied. Silence stretched between us. "You're risking the company," he said. "No," I said. "You did. I'm just not covering for it anymore." He hung up without another word. A week later, Ethan showed up at my door. He looked worse than before. Pale, tense. "They're blaming you," he said. "I know," I replied. "They're saying you're vindictive." I shrugged. "That's easier than admitting they miscalculated." He sat heavily on my couch. "If this goes public." "It won't," I said, "as long as they stop. And if they don't, then it becomes about compliance, not family." He looked at me like he was seeing me for the first time. "You're serious," he said. "I've never been more serious," I replied. After he left, I stood alone in my apartment, listening to the hum of the refrigerator, the distant traffic outside. I thought about the Thanksgiving chair again, how small that moment had seemed, how easy it would have been to dismiss it. That was how it always started. Not with betrayal, with assumption. They assumed I would adjust. They assumed I would stay quiet. They assumed wrong. And now, whether they liked it or not, the structure they built without me was being forced to acknowledge my weight. By the time the court date was set, I had stopped answering most calls, not out of spite, out of discipline. Margaret had warned me early on that explanations become liabilities once the conflict turns structural. Every sentence can be twisted into intent. Every apology can be reframed as doubt. So I stopped explaining. I went quiet in a way that was intentional, not accommodating. The notice from the court was plain. A date, a case number. No drama, no accusations. Just a requirement. Disclosure. That was enough to change the temperature in my family overnight. My mother called first. Her voice sounded thin, stretched. Your father isn't sleeping. I'm sorry to hear that, I said. You know this is tearing him apart, she continued. I waited. You've made your point, she said. Can't you just stop now? There it was. The expectation that awareness alone was my victory, that asking the question was the offense, and withdrawing it would restore peace. I haven't made a point, I said. I've made a request. For what? She asked. For the truth, I replied. On paper. She started to cry then. Not loudly, carefully, like she didn't want to alarm anyone else in the house. I don't understand why you're doing this, she said. I closed my eyes. Because I finally understand why you never did. That ended the call. 2 days later, Margaret called me into her office. They've submitted a partial response, she said. Partial? I asked. She slid the documents toward me. Redacted, incomplete, strategic. They're testing you, she said. Seeing how far you'll go. I flipped through the pages. Dates missing. Amounts summarized instead of itemized. They're still hiding, I said. Yes, she replied. And that's important. Why? Because it strengthens your position, she said. Non-compliance speaks louder than cooperation. That night, Rachel sent me a long message. Not angry. Calculated. She wrote about family loyalty, about sacrifice, about how our father had carried everyone. About how I was jeopardizing something bigger than myself. I read it once. Then I archived it. No reply. The next morning, my phone buzzed again. This time, from an unknown number. Claire, this is Thomas Reed. I represent Whitman Industrial Supplies Board. We need to speak. That was new. Margaret raised an eyebrow when I told her. That means they're worried about exposure, she said. The call was brief. Thomas Reed spoke carefully, avoiding names. There are concerns about governance, he said. Your actions have raised questions. I didn't raise them, I replied. I responded to omissions. A pause. We'd like to understand your intent, he said. I want compliance, I said. That's it. And if you get it? He asked. Then this ends, I replied. He didn't argue. A week passed. Then 2. The pressure shifted again. Instead of warnings, there were offers. Margaret forwarded the first one to me with a single note. They're trying to buy time. The offer proposed a fixed annual payout in exchange for pausing the disclosure request. Not stopping it. Pausing. It's a stall, I said. Yes, Margaret agreed. And a test. I declined. The second offer came 3 days later. Larger. Cleaner. Still no acknowledgement of wrongdoing. Still no transparency. I declined. Again. By the third offer, my father called me directly. I don't recognize you anymore, he said. I recognize myself for the first time, I replied. You're punishing us, he said. No, I said. I stopped protecting you. There was a long silence. When did you become so cold? He asked. I thought about that. I didn't, I said. I just stopped being warm for free. He hung up. That night, Ethan called. They're panicking, he said. I know, I replied. The board's asking questions, he continued. They're talking about audits. That's what transparency looks like, I said. He sighed. I don't think Dad ever thought you'd do this. Neither did I replied. The court deadline arrived. Margaret filed a motion noting deficiencies in the disclosure. No accusations, just facts. 2 days later, We received a notice. A judge had ordered full compliance within 30 days. No extensions, no partials. I sat in my car after reading it, hands resting on the steering wheel, heart steady. This was no longer about family dynamics. This was about law, and law didn't care who usually got the chair at Thanksgiving. That evening, my grandmother called. "You held," she said simply. "Yes," I replied. "I hoped you would," she said, "but I never expected it." Neither had I. As I hung up, I realized something important. I had crossed a line they couldn't follow me across, not because they lacked power, but because they had built their power on my silence. And silence, once broken, never fits back into the shape it came from. The 30-day compliance order changed everything. Not loudly, not immediately, but in the way people started choosing their words when my name came up. Margaret explained it to me over the phone. "This is the point where family stops being the primary concern," she said. "Now it's about liability." I understood that instinctively. Liability makes people honest in ways love never does. The first thing that happened was silence. Total. No calls from my parents, no messages from Rachel, no updates from Ethan. Even my grandmother went quiet, though I knew that was strategic. She'd lived long enough to know when observation mattered more than commentary. The second thing was movement. Margaret received notices from 3 separate accounting firms requesting extensions on behalf of entities connected to Whitman Industrial Supply. That told us the work was being distributed, compartmentalized, a classic containment move. "They're scrambling," she said, "and they're trying to keep the scope narrow." "Will it work?" I asked. "Not if the judge meant what he wrote," she replied. I kept going to work. I attended meetings. I submitted reports. From the outside, my life still looked ordinary. But internally, something had shifted again. I wasn't bracing anymore. I was waiting. 2 weeks into the compliance window, Thomas Reed called again. This time, he didn't bother with small talk. "The board is concerned," he said. "Not just about the filings, about what might surface." "I didn't create the risk," I replied. "I know," he said, "but you're holding the door open." "That door should never have been locked," I said. He sighed. "What would make you comfortable?" I considered the question carefully. "I want independent oversight written into the trust," I said. "Permanent. I want clear separation between company funds and trust assets. And I want acknowledgement that prior disclosures were incomplete." There was a pause. "That's significant," he said. "So was erasing me," I replied. He didn't argue. 3 days later, Rachel broke the silence. She didn't call. She didn't text. She sent an email. It was long, polished, emotional in a controlled way. She wrote about our childhood, about how I'd always been strong, capable, the one who didn't need protecting. She wrote about how Dad leaned on her and how pressure had shaped her choices. She wrote about family unity. She never mentioned the documents. She never mentioned the trust. She never said sorry. I read it once, then forwarded it to Margaret without comment. "That's not for you," Margaret said after a moment. "That's for a record." "Whose?" I asked. "Hers," she replied. That was the moment I realized something else. This wasn't just about my parents. Rachel had built her identity on the assumption that I would never challenge her position. My silence had been part of her foundation. Removing it threatened more than money. It threatened narrative. A week later, the first full disclosure arrived. Boxes, digital files, ledgers spanning years. Margaret and I went through them slowly, methodically. Patterns emerged. Not criminal in the dramatic sense, but improper, self-serving, designed to minimize scrutiny. "They treated the trust like a backup account," I said. "Yes," she replied, "because they assumed you'd never look." The irony didn't escape either of us. That afternoon, my father finally called. Not angry, not defensive, tired. "I don't know how this got so far," he said. "It got far because it was hidden," I replied. He exhaled. "You could have come to me." "I did," I said, "for years. Just not about this." Silence. "I never thought of you as weak," he said. "I know," I replied. "You thought of me as safe." That hit him harder than anything else I'd said. "You always landed on your feet," he said quietly. "Yes," I replied, "because no one made room for me to sit." Another silence. "I don't know how to fix this," he said. "I'm not asking you to," I replied. "I'm asking you to stop resisting the fix." The call ended without resolution. 2 days later, Margaret received a revised proposal. Not from my parents' attorney, from the board. It outlined structural changes, independent audits, separation of assets, formal recognition of my beneficiary status. Not as secondary, as equal. This is new, Margaret said. It's overdue, I replied. And there's more, she added. They want you to sign off. I read the proposal twice. For the first time since Thanksgiving, I felt something like relief. Not because I was winning, but because the fight was finally being reframed. This wasn't Claire versus her family. This was governance versus assumption. I agreed to review the terms. That night, I sat alone in my apartment, the city quiet outside my window. I thought about how close I'd come to signing that first waiver without reading it closely. How easy it would have been to stay the reliable one, the agreeable one. I thought about the chair again, how small it had seemed, and how everything had changed because I noticed it. The next chapter wasn't going to be louder. It was going to be final. The proposal from the board was clean in a way the earlier offers had never been. No emotional language, no appeals to family unity, just structure, obligations, and consequences. It read like something written by people who expected to be held accountable. Margaret and I sat across from each other in her office, both of us quiet, as we read. "They're taking this out of your parents' hands," she said finally. "I noticed," I replied. "That's intentional," she continued. "It protects the company, and it limits damage." "To them," I said. She nodded. "Yes, and to you." The document acknowledged incomplete disclosures in prior years. It didn't admit wrongdoing, but it didn't deny it either. It established an independent trustee with full authority. It formally recognized me as an equal beneficiary under my grandmother's trust. Not contingent, not secondary. Equal. There was one clause I read twice. In the event of future restructuring, sale, or transfer of controlling interest, all beneficiaries shall receive proportional notice and consent rights. Consent, not notification. Consent. I leaned back in my chair. They didn't offer this before because they didn't think they had to. Margaret smiled faintly. They still don't want to. But now they understand the cost of not doing it. We marked revisions, clarified language, tightened timelines, removed anything that relied on goodwill instead of enforcement. When we finished, Margaret looked at me. "Are you ready for what happens after you sign this?" "Yes," I said. She studied my face. "They'll comply, but they won't forget." "I'm not asking them to," I replied. "I'm asking them to stop deciding for me." The board meeting was scheduled for the following Friday. I attended remotely, camera on, voice steady. Thomas Reed led the discussion. He didn't use my name more than necessary. He didn't need to. The terms were accepted unanimously. No applause. No commentary. Just a vote. After the meeting ended, my phone rang almost immediately. It was my mother. "I hear it's done," she said. "It's structured," I replied. She sighed. "Your father is struggling." "I know," I said. There was a pause. Then, quietly, "You didn't have to do it this way." I considered that. "Yes," I said. "I did." She didn't argue. That weekend, Ethan came over. He looked lighter somehow. Less tense. "They're changing everything at the company," he said. "New policies, oversight." Dad's furious. I nodded. "He'll adjust." "You're calm about this," he said. "I worked through the panic earlier," I replied. "This part is just implementation." He hesitated. "Rachel's not handling it well." "I didn't expect she would," I said. "She says you blindsided her." I looked at him. She never asked where I was standing. He didn't push back. 2 weeks later, the trust documents were officially amended. Margaret emailed me the final versions. Clean, clear, enforceable. I signed them without ceremony. When I left her office, the sky was gray and low. Ordinary. It felt appropriate. That night, I dreamed of the dining room again. This time, the table was larger. Extra chairs pulled in. My name wasn't written anywhere. It didn't need to be. I woke up feeling steady. The next morning, Rachel texted me for the first time since her email. "We need to talk." I stared at the message for a long moment. Then, I replied, "I'm available next week." With lawyers. 3 dots appeared. Disappeared. Appeared again. Finally, she wrote, "That won't be necessary." I set the phone down. The silence that followed didn't feel like punishment. It felt like distance. Intentional. Protective. At work, my manager asked if I wanted to take on a new initiative, something cross-functional, visible. I said yes, without hesitation. I noticed something then. How easily I'd started saying yes to myself. The structure around me had changed. But more importantly, the structure inside me had too. I no longer filled gaps by default. I chose where to stand. And for the first time, I didn't feel like I was borrowing space in my own life. The first thing I noticed after everything was finalized was how quiet my phone became. Not the peaceful kind of quiet, the intentional kind. The kind people use when they're recalibrating how much access they still have to you. I hadn't cut anyone off. I hadn't blocked numbers. I hadn't issued ultimatums. I had simply stopped filling the empty spaces they used to occupy without asking. Margaret warned me this part would feel strange. Once you're no longer manageable, she said, people don't know where to put you. She was right. My mother called once a week instead of every other day. A conversation stayed on safe ground. Weather, recipes, neighbors. She never mentioned the trust or the company, and I didn't bring it up either. Not because it was forbidden, but because it no longer needed defending. My father didn't call at all. I heard about him through Ethan, how he'd stopped going into the office every day, how he'd started deferring decisions he used to control personally, how the board meetings exhausted him. He says he feels pushed out, Ethan told me one night over the phone. He pushed himself into a corner, I replied. That was the first time I'd said it out loud. Rachel avoided me entirely. Family group messages stopped. Invitations arrived late or not at all. When I did attend something, the atmosphere shifted around me, careful and alert, like people weren't sure which version of me they were dealing with. I didn't correct them. At work, the new initiative took more of my time than I expected. Meetings with executives, decisions that carried weight. For the first time, I wasn't the person behind the scenes making things easier for everyone else. I was visible. One afternoon, after a particularly long meeting, I caught myself waiting for someone to override me, to step in and reassign authority. No one did. I realized how deeply I'd internalized the expectation that my role was temporary, conditional. That expectation was gone now. The Trust's independent trustee scheduled a review call in early spring. Routine, transparent. He walked through the numbers, answered questions, outlined next steps. I asked about safeguards, enforcement mechanisms, succession contingencies. He answered all of them without hesitation. When the call ended, I sat back in my chair and stared at the wall. No tension, no manipulation, just information. That night, they're adjusting, she said. Yes, I replied, uncomfortably. She chuckled. Good? I asked. Comfort made them careless, she said. Discomfort might make them honest. I smiled. A few weeks later, Rachel showed up at my door. No warning, no text. She looked different, tired, not defeated, but stripped of certainty. I don't know who I am in this anymore, she said. I stepped aside and let her in. Not because I owed her, but because I was curious. She sat on my couch, hands clasped tightly. You were never supposed to push back, she said. That wasn't my responsibility, I replied. I know, she said quickly. I know that now. I waited. They're questioning everything at work, she continued. Every decision, every approval. It's like they don't trust us anymore. They trust systems now, I said. That's the difference. She looked at me sharply. You did this. Yes, I replied. Her mouth tightened. Do you feel good about it? I thought about that. I feel finished, I said. She flinched. I didn't take anything from you, I continued. I stopped letting you take from me. She stood abruptly. This isn't over. I met her eyes. It is for me. She left without another word. That night, I slept deeply. Not because everything was resolved, but because I wasn't bracing anymore. In the weeks that followed, I noticed something else. The stories people told about me changed. I was no longer the easy one, the flexible one, the one who would understand. I was described as serious, calculated, difficult. I didn't correct that either. Those words had weight. Boundaries tend to sound like threats to people who benefit from your lack of them. At the end of April, I received a formal letter. My father was stepping down from the company, effective immediately. Not retiring, resigning. I read it twice. There was no note, no explanation, just a fact. I felt no triumph, no guilt, only clarity. He hadn't lost power because I took it. He lost it because the structure no longer allowed him to hold it unchecked. That distinction mattered. The next chapter of my life wasn't going to be about confrontation. It was going to be about choice. And for the first time, that choice belonged entirely to me. The invitation arrived in late May. No subject line, no greeting. Just a forwarded email thread with a date circled in yellow and a single sentence from my mother. Your grandmother wants everyone together. It was for Memorial Day weekend. At the old lake house again. The same place where silence used to stretch longer than conversation. Where loyalty had always been measured by how little trouble you caused. I stared at the email for a long time before responding. I didn't ask who would be there. I didn't ask what the agenda was. I replied with one word. Okay. When I arrived, the driveway was already full. Cars I recognized, cars I didn't. The house looked unchanged. Same peeling paint along the railing, same wind chimes on the porch. But something about it felt different, like a set after the actors had left. Rachel was there, Ethan too, my parents, a few extended relatives I hadn't seen in years, and my grandmother, seated near the window, wrapped in a light sweater despite the warmth. She smiled when she saw me, not relieved, satisfied. We ate outside. Long tables pushed together, food passed hand to hand, conversations overlapping, no assigned seats. I noticed that immediately. My father kept his distance. He didn't avoid me, but he didn't seek me out either. When our eyes met briefly, he nodded. Just that. Rachel watched me more than she spoke. Ethan hovered between groups, visibly uncomfortable. At one point, my aunt leaned over and whispered, "Things feel different." "Yes," I said. "They are." After dinner, my grandmother asked for everyone's attention. She didn't raise her voice. She never needed to. "I won't be here forever," she said plainly. "And I wanted to see how you all behaved when no one was in charge." A few people laughed nervously. "I've watched this family confuse control with care for decades," she continued. "And I've watched one of you carry the weight of that confusion quietly." Her eyes found mine. "I set things in motion years ago," she said. "Not to punish anyone, but to make sure silence didn't become a condition for belonging." The air felt thick. My father looked down at his hands. Rachel's face flushed. "I won't be mediating anymore," my grandmother said. "Not between siblings, not between generations. You'll either treat each other with respect or you'll deal with the consequences." She looked around the table. "Claire has done nothing wrong," she said. "She did what none of you were willing to do. She stopped absorbing what didn't belong to her." No one argued. That was the most telling part. Later, as the sun set, my mother approached me. "I didn't know how to stop it," she said quietly. "I know," I replied. "That doesn't excuse me," she said. "No," I agreed. "But it explains you." She nodded, tears in her eyes. My father approached last. He stood beside me, looking out at the water. "I thought stepping back would make this easier," he said. "It made it honest," I replied. He nodded once. I should have listened sooner. I didn't respond. Not because I was withholding forgiveness, but because I wasn't negotiating closure. That night, I slept in the room I used to have as a child. Nothing had changed. Same dresser, same view of the lake. But I had. The next morning, as I packed to leave, my grandmother pressed something into my hand. A small envelope. "Open it later," she said. I waited until I was home. Inside was a letter she'd written years ago, but never sent. It ended with one line that stayed with me. "You don't owe anyone access to you, just because you learned how to survive them." I folded the letter carefully. That weekend didn't fix my family, but it did something more important. It changed the shape of the story they were allowed to tell about me. And I no longer felt the need to correct it. The question came from a stranger first. It was a Tuesday afternoon at work, near the end of a long meeting, when a woman from another department lingered as people packed up their laptops. "I heard about your family," she said carefully, like she wasn't sure she was allowed to ask. "That must have been a lot." "It was," I replied. She hesitated, then asked the question I would hear more than once in the months that followed. "Why didn't you just let it go?" I looked at her for a moment, not defensively, curiously. "I did," I said, "just not the way they wanted." She nodded slowly, unsure what to do with that answer. and walked away. That was the first time I realized something important. I no longer felt the need to justify myself. The restructuring at Whitman Industrial Supply became public in early June. Framed as modernization, governance updates, long overdue compliance measures, my father's resignation was described as a planned transition. No one mentioned me. That was intentional. Margaret explained it plainly. The cleaner this looks externally, the less anyone wants to revisit the cause. I understood, and for once, I was fine being invisible on paper. My phone stayed quiet. Rachel didn't call. Ethan checked in occasionally. Brief updates that felt more like weather reports than conversations. My mother tried once. "Do you think we could all have dinner sometime?" she asked. "Maybe," I replied. "I'll let you know." I didn't commit. That was new. At work, the cross-functional project gained momentum. My role expanded. I found myself in rooms where decisions were made instead of just prepared. One afternoon, my manager said, "You don't hesitate anymore." I smiled. "I stopped asking permission." She nodded. "It shows." That summer, I took my first real vacation in years. Not a family obligation disguised as rest, just time away. I drove north alone, stayed in a small coastal town, walked for hours without a destination. No one knew where I was. No one needed to. The quiet wasn't lonely. It was spacious. One evening, sitting on a bench overlooking the water, I thought about how long I'd confused being needed with being valued. How often I'd accepted exclusion because it came wrapped in politeness. I thought about the Thanksgiving chair again. How small that moment had seemed. How everything had changed because I paid attention to it. When I got home, there was a message from Rachel waiting. "I don't recognize our family anymore." I read it once. Then I typed a reply and deleted it. Then I wrote another and deleted that too. Finally, I sent 2 words. "I do." She didn't respond. A week later, Margaret emailed me a routine update from the trustee. Everything was in order. Safeguards active, no issues. I filed it away without ceremony. Money had become background noise. Clarity hadn't. One evening in July, my grandmother called. "You sound settled," she said. "I am," I replied. "That's good," she said. "It's harder than it looks." "Yes," I said, "but it's quieter." She laughed softly. Quiet scares people who depend on chaos. I thought about that after we hung up, about how often I'd been pulled back into dysfunction simply because my calm made others uncomfortable. That pull was gone now. I no longer answered questions designed to make me smaller. I no longer explained decisions that protected me. And for the first time, I understood something I wish I'd learned earlier. You don't owe anyone access to the version of you that was easiest to control. The chapter wasn't ending yet, but it was narrowing, and that was enough. By late summer, the urgency had drained out of my life. Not the purpose, the urgency. There were no more deadlines tied to family decisions, no more documents waiting for signatures, no more phone calls that tightened my chest before I answered. What remained was quieter and more revealing. I started noticing how often my thoughts no longer circled back to them, how entire days passed without my parents, my siblings, or the company crossing my mind. Not because I was avoiding them, but because they were no longer central. That absence felt strange at first. Then, it felt earned. My mother tried again in August. She invited me to a birthday dinner for my father. Not a celebration, just family, she said. Low-key. I didn't answer immediately. That was the difference now. I gave myself time before responding. In the past, I would have said yes automatically, then spent days managing my expectations so I wouldn't be disappointed. Now I asked a different question. Do I want to be there? The answer surprised me. No. I texted back later that evening. I won't make it. I hope it's a good night. She replied with a heart emoji and nothing else. No guilt, no pressure. Either she was learning or she was tired. Both were acceptable. At work, my role solidified into something permanent, not flashy, but respected. I was trusted with information before it became a problem. Asked for input instead of instructed. One afternoon, a colleague asked how I'd gotten so comfortable holding firm boundaries. I told her the truth. I learned what happens when you don't. She nodded, like that was enough. In September, my grandmother's health declined. Not dramatically, just steadily. She called less often, slept more. When we did talk, her voice was softer, but her mind was sharp. I'm glad I stayed long enough to see this, she told me one evening. See what? I asked. You, she said. Standing where you belong. I swallowed. You're the reason I noticed. No, she replied. I just left breadcrumbs. That fall, I cleaned out the last box from my parents' house. Old school papers, photos, things they'd stored for years without asking if I wanted them. At the bottom of the box, I found a handwritten list in my mother's handwriting. Thanksgiving seating, 2018. Names neatly arranged. 8 chairs. My name, written, then crossed out. I stared at it for a long time. Then I folded the paper and threw it away. Not because it didn't matter, but because it didn't get to matter anymore. Rachel reached out once more before the year ended. Not to argue, not to explain. Just a message. I don't know how to talk to you now. I considered that carefully before responding. You don't have to. She never wrote back. As winter approached, I felt something settle fully into place. I wasn't waiting for acknowledgement anymore. I wasn't hoping for understanding. I had stopped positioning my life around people who only knew how to value me when I stayed small. That didn't make me angry. It made me free. The holidays came and went quietly. Friends, warm food, laughter that didn't require effort. No chair to look for. No seat to earn. Just space. The final shift came without drama, the way real change often does. I realized I no longer needed the story to continue. I had lived through the unraveling. I had survived the silence. And what came after didn't need an audience. The last change didn't announce itself. There was no argument, no document, no phone call that marked it as final. It arrived quietly, on an ordinary morning, the way most permanent things do. I was sitting at my kitchen table, coffee cooling beside me, scrolling through emails before work. A routine update from the independent trustee sat in my inbox. No red flags, no action required. Everything in order. I closed the email without rereading it. That was when I understood something had ended. Not the trust, not the situation, the need. For years, I had measured progress by reaction, by tension easing or flaring, by how much resistance I met when I asserted myself. Now, there was nothing pushing back. No one needed me to soften anything. No one was waiting to see what I'd tolerate. My life had become boring, in the best possible way. Later that week, my father emailed me, not through an assistant, directly. I've decided to sell my remaining interest next year. It's time. I read it twice. There was no apology, no explanation, no expectation of approval, just a statement. I replied with one sentence. I hope it brings you peace. He wrote back an hour later. I think it will. That was it. I didn't feel victory. I didn't feel loss. I felt distance that no longer needed defending. At work, my promotion became official. More responsibility, more authority. No ceremony, just trust earned over time. I accepted it without hesitation. I didn't wonder if it would upset anyone else. That night, I cooked dinner for myself and ate at the table by the window. The same table where I'd once spread out documents in panic, trying to understand what was being taken from me. Now it held nothing but a plate and a glass of water. I thought about the person I'd been when this started, how carefully I'd navigated rooms, how often I'd checked other people's reactions before deciding how to feel. I hadn't been weak. I'd been trained to believe that being low maintenance was the same as being loved, that peace was something you earned by staying quiet, that belonging was conditional. Unlearning that hadn't been dramatic. It had been methodical. One decision at a time. One boundary held. One explanation withheld. The following weekend, I visited my grandmother. She was smaller now, her voice quieter, but her eyes were still sharp. You look settled, she said. I am, I replied. She nodded. That's the part people don't tell you about. After the storm. What part? I asked. That piece doesn't feel exciting, she said. It feels plain, and that's how you know it's real. I stayed with her for the afternoon. We talked about ordinary things, weather, neighbors, memories that didn't hurt anymore. Before I left, she squeezed my hand. You didn't win by taking anything from them, she said. You won by refusing to disappear. I drove home with the windows down, letting cold air fill the car. The holidays came again, quietly. I didn't wait for invitations. I made my own plans. Friends, warm food, laughter that didn't require strategy, no seating charts, No omissions to notice. Just people who expected me to show up as I was. That was a real inheritance. Not money, not assets, choice. I choose who has access to me now, who hears my voice, who benefits from my effort. I no longer confuse love with control or silence with peace. If you're listening to this and parts of it feel uncomfortably familiar, I want you to know something. Betrayal doesn't always come with shouting. Sometimes it arrives with paperwork, with polite smiles, with being told there's no space for you at a table that was always supposed to include you. Revenge doesn't have to be loud to be complete. Sometimes it looks like clarity, like calling a lawyer, like not signing what was meant to erase you, like walking away without asking anyone to understand. The moment you stop negotiating your worth, the story changes. Not for them, for you. If this story resonated with you, if you've ever been excluded, managed, or quietly pushed aside by the people you trusted most, I'd love to hear from you. Leave a comment and tell me what moment made things clear for you. And if you want more stories like this, about family drama, betrayal, karma, and what happens when the tables turn without shouting, make sure to like, subscribe, and stay with me. Some endings aren't about closure. They're about choosing yourself. And once you do, nothing ever fits the old shape again.